in the scorching North African desert, a newly formed secret British regiment, the Special Air Service, must strike deep behind enemy lines. Their mission? To seek out and destroy a harbor that is vital to the Nazi war machine, cutting off supply lines and halting their advance, no matter the cost. The SAS had the expertise, but do they have the experience to pull off this dangerous raid? In World War II, some of the most astonishing military raids changed the tide of history. Now, we tell these stories in a way that has never been possible before, using state-of-the-art graphics, expert analysis, live weapon and explosive demos, and first-person accounts from the men who made history. We forensically examine exactly how these actions unfolded, minute by minute. We can now discover whether it was skill, clever tactics, or just luck that carried the day. Men of L Detachment SAS, along with their drivers and 2 members of the Special Boat Section, set off from their forward operating base. They are already deep inside enemy territory, but ahead of them lies a 6-day drive to their objective. They're heading for Borat Harbor on the Libyan coast of the Mediterranean. It's one of their most crucial missions yet, to infiltrate the harbor and destroy Rommel's vital fuel supplies, the lifeblood of the Germans' desert campaign. The SAS are no strangers to the desert. Driving in the dead of night, the convoy is faced with inevitable tire punctures and repairs that slow the unit down. The terrain is tough and unforgiving, but each man is armed and dressed for the harsh conditions. The SAS uniform is anything but standard and follows an unconventional mix-and-match approach. Each man wears a beige shirt and pants or shorts. His headdress is the Arab shirmag, worn for sun and dust protection. His belt supports a holstered pistol and a Fairburn Sykes fighting knife.
The Fairburn Sykes knife is synonymous with the commandos of Special Forces. The blade was made of hide carbon steel. It was double-edged and had a thumbprint for extra grip. The handle was made of leather and had a sharp skull crusher on the end of the pommel. The knife was slender and designed to go into the rib cage deep and be pulled out without any problems.
As the SAS descend deeper into enemy territory, they can hear the distant sound of German and Italian bombers scouring the desert. The men know it won't be too long before the enemy come looking for them. In June 1940, Italy entered World War II on the side of the Nazis. They were eager to conquer the British Protectorate of Egypt and take control of the strategically vital Suez Canal. At this stage in the war, the British Empire stands almost alone against its enemies, and the Suez Canal is a vital artery linking Britain to her overseas dominions.
The battle for North Africa was really about oil and natural resources. If the Germans took the Suez Canal, they would get access to Middle Eastern oil and cut the British off from critical resources coming from Asia. Oil is the lifeblood for Britain's military. The army is growing increasingly mechanized, the Air Force desperately needs petrol for its planes, and the Navy needs oil for its ships.
In winter 1940, the British launch an attack supported by Australian, Indian, and Free French troops. Mussolini's forces collapse. Shocked by the fall of his allies, Hitler dispatches the brilliant general Erwin Rommel to lead the German Afrika Korps in a devastating counterattack. By 1942, it is forcing the British and Commonwealth Army back to defensive positions along the so-called Gazala Line. Rommel's advance is dependent on supplies being sent from the coast to the front line, and the British know that destroying them will greatly hinder the German African campaign. Leading the men on this mission to target Borat Harbor, and the brains behind the newly formed SAS, is Major David Stirling.
Very few soldiers in the British Army will ever have such a chance as we've got.
One of the first members of the SAS, and Stirling's second in command, is American-born Sergeant Major Pat Riley.
I went down to collect some rations and heard what you might term idle conversation about do-or-die boys being formed in Egypt.
Restless for action, Riley was quick to volunteer for the newborn SAS, and soon found himself reporting to its headquarters in Kabrit. Riley and the SAS are briefed on their next objective: Libya's coastal harbor of Borat, the main supply point for the Afrika Korps. Fuel dumps and shipping there could and should be blown up. The SAS will team up with 2 members of the Special Boat Section to make their assault. Traveling in convoy, they must cross enemy territory by night to reach the target of Borat Harbor, avoiding detection by patrolling enemy aircraft. Once they reach the main rendezvous point 65 miles from Borat on the night of January 23rd, the men must switch to a single vehicle. They will travel the last 50 miles by road before launching their assault at midnight. The raiders will enter the harbor on foot in 3 teams. The men of the Special Boat Section will set timed explosions on any shipping, while the 2 SAS teams must take out vitally important fuel trucks and food dumps. They have 2 hours to complete this mission and make their escape before the explosives are set to trigger at 2:30 a.m. After annihilating this vital enemy supply source, the squad must regroup and evade all enemy retaliation. They then have to return to their vehicles and escape back to Allied territory. L Detachment's battle chariot is the Ford 01 pickup truck. The distinguishing feature of this vehicle is the V-grille in front. Holes are cut into the engine's hood to allow better air circulation to the motor. Among other modifications are a set of rear fenders which provide easy access to the tires, along with the pedestal machine gun mounts. A superstructure of wood is built up around the truck bed. Storage bins are then fixed to this framework. This example is armed with twin Vickers K machine guns.
The Vickers. When the SAS were operating in North Africa, weapons were in short supply, but these weren't. The RAF had stored loads of them, and this was a fact that the SAS took full advantage of. It was loaded with a drum magazine and contained 100 .303 rounds. It fired at a rate of 1,000 rounds a minute, perfect for a raid.
Stirling and his team have been driving throughout the night. It's an arduous and exhausting task.
Desert driving is a skill. Dust trails can be seen for miles and noise carries. Safer to drive in columns slowly, but these guys must drive fast and fan out so they don't eat the sand chucked up from the vehicles in front. This means that each driver is carving out fresh tracks, increasing the risk of hitting boulders and mines.
The SAS aren't acting alone. Transporting these men into the heart of enemy territory is the Long Range Desert Group. Founded in 1940, the LRDG was formed specifically to carry out deep penetration, covert reconnaissance patrols, and intelligence missions behind enemy lines. After a series of failed parachute drops over their objectives, the SAS needed a new method of infiltration they could rely on. The LRDG were it. Experts in desert navigation, the LRDG could guide the SAS straight to their targets. Each patrol had a navigator equipped with a non-magnetic compass and a surveyor's scope. Escorting Major Stirling and his men to Borat Harbor is a full patrol of the LRDG, including navigators, drivers, mechanics, gunners, and radio operators.
The LRDG became a sort of armed taxi driver force to actually insert the SAS behind enemy lines. And the two together worked far better than either one in separation.
After 6 days of traveling, L Detachment are now 200 miles from their target. So far, so good, but Major Stirling is still waiting on the details of the layout of Borat Harbor from photo reconnaissance and the exact location of the ships and fuel carriers they are to destroy. Now as dawn breaks, the men descend the steep sides of the dry gully of Wadi Tamet to take daytime cover from enemy eyes. All is going according to plan, but the fortunes of this type of mission can turn on a dime.
The desert can be your best friend or worst enemy. It's a very clean battlefield. There are no civilians and no built-up areas. On the downside, there's no cover from the enemy. Once you're exposed, you're dead.
From the skies above them, an Italian spotter plane on a routine patrol sees the SAS camp. Within minutes, a squadron of enemy fighter bombers is on its way to intercept them. Major Stirling and his raiding party are halfway to their target, Borat Harbor on the coast of Libya. But their mission to disrupt General Erwin Rommel's vital shipping and fuel supply lines is already in trouble. The SAS have been spotted by the enemy and are about to be attacked by a squadron of Italian fighter bombers. The Macchi C-200 Saeta was a World War II fighter bomber used in various forms throughout the Italian Air Force. The MC-200 had excellent maneuverability. Stability in a high-speed dive was exceptional, but it was underpowered and underarmed for a modern fighter. However, its strong all-metal construction and air-cooled engine made the aircraft ideal for ground attack. 6 fighter bombers fly up and down the Wadi, bombing and strafing the SAS for over an hour. There is very little shelter for L Detachment. They're a sitting target in an open desert. In the line of fire is 22-year-old former boxing champion, Corporal Reg Seekings.
The rocks, which I was sitting by, suddenly became as small as peas. The driver of our truck jumped behind the wheel. Unfortunately, someone had hung his pants over the radiator and these caught in the fan. So he jumped off again and we scrambled for the nearest shelter.
This single pair of drying pants nearly cost the men their lives and the SAS its entire mission. The SAS scatter around the gully to dodge the incoming gunfire. Yet remarkably, they take no casualties. But there's a serious problem. The squad's radio truck and its 3 operators are missing. Any hope of last-minute information on the targets around the harbor is gone. Now the SAS will have to search for the fuel dumps with no reliable intelligence. Despite this setback, Major Stirling insists they push on towards their main rendezvous point outside Borat.
We will have to reorganize a little. There are plenty of targets waiting for us at Borat.
It is this ability to think on their feet that makes the SAS such an elite force.
To survive their mission and make it back to base, the SAS have to rely on their unique Special Forces training. The desert is a super tough environment. It's very hot in the day and very cold at night. You need the right clothing, excellent logistics, and you need to be self-sufficient.
Up until now, the SAS has been terrorizing German airfields throughout North Africa. But now Major Stirling has proposed that his men should switch from attacking airfields to striking ports. The SAS was first formed in 1941, and Stirling carefully handpicked each of his men for this elite fighting force. One of these recruits, and the youngest of the squad, is 17-year-old Corporal Johnny Cooper.
One day we were in the slit trenches, and suddenly the adjutant sent a message saying there's a Lieutenant Stirling wants to see you. I went up there. I didn't even realise he knew my name. Would we volunteer for a special unit in which you may have to parachute? He interviewed everyone. I said yes, and that was it.
The SAS arrive at their rendezvous point, 65 miles from Borat, and camouflage their vehicles. This is the place they will return to once their mission is complete. Among the group are 2 members of the Special Boat Section who are joining forces with the SAS for the first time. Trained to seek out and sabotage high-value naval targets, their objective is to attach limpet mines to Rommel's ships in Borat Harbor and sink them. Their main method of infiltration is the Fallbot folding canoe.
Okay, so what you've got here is the modern version of the folding boat, but it hasn't changed massively since the folding boats of World War II. But the first thing you do is open the skin up and get ready to put your frame in. The wooden frame, this is the spine of the boat, creates the rigidity along the base. All of this is made of lightweight wood, very strong, and you've got some alloy metal. Those are sort of the more modern components. Going back many years, it would have been heavier wood, heavier steel, and heavier canvas fabrics. So we count ourselves lucky nowadays compared to the raiders of World War II, who would have been carrying a lot heavier kit than us. Going on an operation with one of these boats. You'll be doing this behind enemy lines at night in silence. It is a very slick operation. These are the rudder pedals. They're connected to the back of the boat where the rudder is by cables. It allows us to control the direction of the boat using our feet, and we can then just focus on power through the arms. You will be very well protected. You're able to take waves over the boat, but you're not waterproof, so there will be water going in. Pretty important pieces of kit, this. Obviously the bailers, you need every now and then to be able to get in there and stop yourself from sinking by bailing out. The final piece of construction is to put the spray deck onto the top of the boat. 2 sets of paddles. You climb in, you've got all your kit on board, and you're ready to go.
With all 6 vehicles camouflaged, L detachments strike out in a single truck to Borat to attack one of Rommel's most important fuel depots.
Another important effect was if the British could hit the Germans hard behind their supply lines, the Germans would realise that their lines of communication were threatened. And then they would have to devote more of their resources to protecting those lines of supply. And this would weaken the whole German war effort in North Africa.
The SAS are getting closer to doing just that, destroying a harbor packed with supplies that Rommel's Africa Corps need to fuel their campaign. Jammed into the back of the truck, the raiding party begin the grueling drive across 25 miles of rough desert towards the surface road to Borat. Now deep in the heart of enemy territory, the SAS team enters the kill zone, a wide belt of minefields laid by the Germans. Landmines were used extensively by both Allied and Axis forces throughout the North African campaign. The explosive device was concealed under or on the ground, and was designed to destroy or disable enemy targets as they moved over it. It is estimated that some 80,000 mines were laid along the Borat line in Libya during World War II. This is a Teller mine. It contains over 10 pounds of explosives, and this is what it's capable of. And it could happen to the SAS at any moment. Despite the looming threat of landmines, all is going well. But then, disaster. The truck hits a deep hole, sending the folding boat crashing into the side of the vehicle. The canoe splits in two. It's a massive blow to the squad, and a potential disaster that could sink the raid before it even begins. The SAS team is just 12 miles from their target, Erwin Rommel's vital port in Borat on the coast of Libya. But their mission to destroy supply ships anchored in the harbor is in trouble, having just lost the very piece of equipment they need to pull this off, their folding Falbot canoe. Their commander, Major Stirling, must quickly come up with a new plan.
If we can't get the ships, we'll get the harbor installations instead. They're almost as important. If the enemy can't unload his supplies, they'll be as useless to him as though we'd sunk them.
Major Stirling orders 2 men from the special boat section to target the Germans' radio station 2 miles on the other side of Borat. It's a masterstroke that would wipe out a vital link in Rommel's communication network. The harbor is likely to be heavily patrolled by the Africa Corps, and reinforcements could be quickly mobilized. Spread around the port are machine gun nests containing the infamous MG-34.
The MG-34. It's been around since the Spanish Civil War. Allies simply knew it as the Spandau. It was belt-fed and fired a 7.92 rounds, but attached a saddle drum with 50 rounds, and it'll be employed on tanks and aircraft. The MG-34 had a very distinctive, circular, perforated air-cooled barrel. One of the problems is that it was so over-engineered that it was very expensive to produce. Although it didn't quite have the firepower of its brother, the MG-42, it was still a pretty formidable weapon.
The 113,000-man Africa Corps was formed on Adolf Hitler's personal orders in January 1941, with Erwin Rommel designated as the commander.
The Africa Corps was brought into North Africa in order to shore up Germany's Italian allies, who of course by this point had been quite badly beaten. The Africa Corps had a number of advantages, partly technological with its tanks, but also in their leader, Erwin Rommel, who became something of a legend both with his enemies as well as with his allies.
The raiding party arrive a mile outside Borat. They set their explosives and timers to detonate at 2:30 a.m. once they're well out of the area. Splitting into 3 sabotage units, they leave their driver to wait with the truck. Captain Duncan and the special boat section move to their objective, the military radio station on the far side of town. The remaining 2 groups under the command of Major Stirling and Sergeant Major Riley approach the harbor from opposite sides. Major Stirling and his men move ahead first. Stealth is everything. No one must use a gun for fear of alerting the defenders. With no radio contact, each party is acting alone. Approaching their targets, the harbor is at their mercy. Throughout their North Africa campaign, the Afrika Korps is mostly dependent on sea transport to move vital supplies such as fuel, water, ammunition, and repair parts over from Italy and up to the front line. With the port of Benghazi currently in the hands of the Allies, intelligence suggests that Borat Harbor is being used not only as a refueling point, but as one of Rommel's chief storage dumps. A successful attack on this vital supply port would be disastrous for the Afrika Korps Desert Campaign, making it a key target for the SAS.
The harbor at Burat is deep in enemy territory, and it's where the oil tankers dock to bring the fuel that is so critical to powering Rommel's Afrika Korps. Burat's a choke point for the Nazis. It's where the oil tankers from the Mediterranean come in and offload the fuel to the vehicles that will then carry it to the front line. If Stirling and the SAS can carry out this operation successfully, it will inflict serious damage on Afrika Korps' ability to carry out this desert campaign.
Advancing in single file, the SAS team find themselves at a row of warehouses on the quay. Though the desire of these raiders is to pass like shadows into enemy camp, an SAS trooper still goes into battle, tooled up with an array of small arms.
If a chappie liked a weapon, a Luger, or just a 45, he carried that. So you didn't say a troop consisted of so many 45s or Tommy guns or whatever. It consisted entirely of what the man wanted himself.
The Colt .45 caliber M1911 semi-automatic pistol, a US icon, and one of the only weapons to be used through both world wars and right up until the 1980s. This pistol is a great close-quarter weapon. It's light, it's reliable. That's why it's been in service for so long.
As the men make their way to their objectives, they have to be ready for whatever happens next. Major Stirling leads his men to the pier, where they take their bearings and are immediately confronted by an empty harbor.
The port area was deserted, but there were no ships.
With no ships in the harbor, this is a major setback. There's every chance that Rommel's Afrika Korps is no longer using this port as a supply dump. The very targets the SAS have traveled over 800 miles to destroy may not even be here. Major Stirling has no choice but to push on with his team and destroy whatever targets they can find. They start with a row of warehouses. He divides his men. One group will stay posted outside, keeping lookout, while the other team will begin to prepare the chaos they came here to create.
We planted our bombs in the warehouses. The sentries must have been asleep. Occasionally, we'd bump into another of the parties in the dark.
The SAS's ingenious homemade bomb was invented by one of the unit's founding fathers, Jock Lewis. The men successfully placed their Lewis bombs on heavy machinery while moving in and out of the warehouses. Their work now complete, Major Stirling orders his men to make their way back to the rendezvous, keeping an eye out for possible targets on the way. They stumble across a prime target, a yard filled with gas trucks. So the squad wastes no time, placing 9 bombs in 5 minutes. We detonated 5 gallons of diesel fuel to show how destructive these attacks will be. The effect of a Lewis bomb on a diesel tanker filled with 4,000 gallons of fuel will be devastating. Multiply this by 18, and the damage would be catastrophic. Major Stirling adjusts the last bomb, and with his men behind him, sets off back towards the rendezvous. Sergeant Major Riley is leading his 6-man team around the opposite end of the harbor. He discovers an anti-aircraft gun emplacement. He He shoves a bomb up the breach while its crew sleeps soundly in a tent just yards away and moves off towards the rendezvous. On the far side of town, Captain Duncan's three-man team are arriving at the radio station. The noise catches the attention of a sentry, but fortunately, he doesn't see them. So they press on and spend an hour laying their charges. 30 pounds of TNT set with 2-hour time fuses. There is no doubt the military radio station will be destroyed.
The operation so far has been a success. The SAS didn't give up and turned a disaster into an opportunity. This fits in with the SAS motto, "Who dares wins."
There's 15 minutes to spare before the rendezvous deadline. Major Stirling leads Cooper and Seekings to a car park. No gas trucks this time, but 12 supply vehicles. Stirling places a Lewis bomb with a timed fuse in each. Within 5 minutes, they move off again into the night. Stirling and Riley's teams arrive at the rendezvous, where their driver is waiting. So far, the unit has got away with the covert operation unnoticed. As he heads away from Borat, Stirling feels he has struck a real blow. The harbor will be unusable for many weeks. But for the operation to be a total success, Captain Duncan must succeed in his task of destroying the radio transmitting center. Major Stirling won't know the outcome of Duncan's mission until he reunites with the Special Boat Section tomorrow. The SAS team make it back to their main rendezvous point in one piece. For now, they must take cover for the rest of the night. As dawn breaks, everyone from Stirling and Riley's squad take cover under their camouflage draped trucks. Their task is to avoid the enemy bombers they know will begin scouring the desert looking for revenge. Fortunately for the SAS team, a sandstorm blows up around midday, grounding the enemy aircraft. It's not until 9 p.m. that Stirling sets off to meet Captain Duncan and the SBS men at an agreed meeting point outside Borat. Johnny Cooper and Reg Seekings are on the back of the truck.
Johnny and I had a most unpleasant ride. In case roadblocks had been set up, we two would lie on the wings of the truck with our Tommies at the ready.
This is the M1 Thompson submachine gun. It's an American gun, designed in World War I and was basically a trench buster. You probably recognise it more from the gangster Hollywood movies. It was actually known as the gangster gun. In those movies, it had a big drum magazine. These magazines held 50 to 100 rounds. The problem with that, the rounds used to keep getting jammed, and there's no point having a jammed weapon on the battlefield. So they changed it to this magazine. Fires a .45 caliber round. Doesn't necessarily have the range, but on close quarter battles, it's what you want. It'll do the job and put someone down. It's solid and reassuringly heavy. You know you've got a weapon in your hand when you hold this.
They make their way along the Borat track. After 2 miles, they spot a little pile of sticks. It is the sign that Captain Duncan is in the vicinity. The three men walk out of the dust storm, and Captain Duncan informs Stirling of their success the night before.
When we reached the rendezvous, we heard the wireless installations go off. There's no doubt about it. The enemy had a pretty sticky night. Then the RAF came over at 10 to night and pasted the harbour for 20 minutes, then flew away. The truth is, don't think there was much left to bomb.
The
the success of this operation meant that the harbor itself would be out of action for a very long time.
The enemy is gathering their forces. But as the SAS make their escape, they remain on the lookout for targets to attack. Within minutes, they come across another German gas truck parked up by the side of the road. It's the same kind they had destroyed the night before, and it appears to be abandoned.
It would be unforgivable to pass this up. Besides, it's a cold night, and you might like to warm your hands.
After placing the bomb on the fuel tank, they wait. But nothing happens. Major Stirling walks back to the gas truck to see what is wrong. As soon as he picks up the bomb, the fuse is triggered. The SAS team may have successfully planted their bombs on every major target they could find at Borat Harbor. But their mission isn't over yet. With a 6-day journey ahead of them, the men still have more targets to hit on the way home. But enemy aircraft are hunting them. And worse still, an unexploded bomb is about to go off in Major Stirling's hands. The bomb has started its countdown, and Stirling has no idea how long he's got. Surviving his near-death experience, Stirling places another bomb with a 10-second fuse on the gas truck. This time the explosion goes according to plan, and the German fuel truck seems to melt away in the huge fire. Eight miles further on, they approach an empty fort, and suddenly they hear a click, and a piece of metal spins into the air behind the truck. It's a bouncing Betty.
This particular nasty piece of kit was the German S-mine, also known as the Bouncing Betty. It was an anti-personnel mine. It would be buried in the ground, so only the top showed. Once these prongs were initiated, it would fly up and launch to about 4 feet, and the high explosives would release ball bearings and shrapnel, shredding everything close by.
One misplaced footstep could activate this deadly charge. And this one has been run over by a 1,600-pound Ford filled with men. The mine hangs in the air, just inches away from them. And doesn't detonate. The men breathe a sigh of relief, but they're not out of trouble yet.
As we motored at speed along the track, we suddenly noticed flashing lights up ahead of us, and a few isolated shots whizzed through the air. Whether they were warning shots or the enemy clearing their guns, we didn't know. But as our truck accelerated down a slight incline, it became painfully obvious that an ambush had been set up.
Figures appear on both sides of the road. The driver ignores Stirling's order to swerve off the track and drives the truck straight into a hail of machine gun bullets and grenades. Cooper grabs the Vickers K machine gun and opens fire.
Stirling was on the back of the truck, and he said to me afterwards, "Young Cooper, that's a marvellous weapon. It had a high rate of fire. I mixed tracer and explosive bullets in it."
Miraculously, the men escape the attack unscathed and finally make it back to their base at JLO.
Not even a ruddy tyre punctured. Once again, the party arrived at the main rendezvous in time for breakfast.
Major Stirling's first raid on fuel supplies at Libya's Borat harbor successfully took out 18 vitally important fuel tankers, 4 food dumps, and other high-value targets. On his return, Stirling soon discovered the reason Borat harbor was so deserted. Rommel had recaptured Benghazi, and his shipping was able to dock once again in the major Libyan port.
Borat was once an essential part of the war, but after the SAS attack, it could no longer serve a significant role for Rommel and the Africa Corps. The raid at Borat also set a blueprint for how the SAS would carry out its raids for the next few months. Stirling's next campaign was to penetrate Benghazi harbor and disrupt Rommel's now critical supply route there.
Despite initial setbacks, this was a textbook sabotage raid. The SAS managed to conceal themselves day and night as they made their way to Borat harbour. They made it in and out of enemy-occupied territory without taking any casualties. They maintained the element of surprise throughout the raid, planting bombs on every petrol carrier they could find, leaving no target intact.
The guerrilla war has only just begun. There is no question that Major David Stirling was the pioneer of something great. The SAS made their mark in the British Desert Campaign and ultimately helped turn the tide of the war against the Axis forces.
The SAS may have started small in the desert in the Second World War, but since then it's gained a global reputation for every field of special operations.
The eventual demise of the Africa Corps began in November 1942 with the joint British-American invasion of French North Africa, codenamed Operation Torch. A series of amphibious landings saw Rommel's army forced into a rapid retreat, and by May 1943, the might of 2 advancing Allied armies trapped the Africa Corps and forced them to surrender. But it was the fearless work of the SAS behind enemy lines that helped weaken the Axis forces and hasten their demise. By the end of the war in North Africa, the SAS had destroyed over 320 of Rommel's aircraft and debilitated many of his vital shipping and supply ports. The hit-and-run operations of the SAS eventually led to Major David Stirling's undoing. He was captured by the Germans in January 1943. After 4 escape attempts, he was eventually banished to the infamous Colditz Castle in the heart of Germany, where he spent the rest of the war. Stirling was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his actions in World War II, and in 1990, he was knighted. Sergeant Major Pat Riley was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal for his service in North Africa. Promoted to captain in 1943, Riley saw action with the regiment in Italy, before returning to Scotland and eventually retiring to Sussex. For their acts of bravery in North Africa, Corporals Reg Seekings and Johnny Cooper were both awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. Both of these men went on to fight on the Western Front, where Seekings was later awarded the Military Medal and Cooper the Order of the British Empire. To this day, the SAS remains one of the world's legendary Special Forces units. Improvisation in the heat of battle and a readiness to throw out standard military tactics was, and still is, at the heart of this brigade's success. This mission was a classic SAS raid, living up to their motto, "Who dares, wins."